I feel as if I spent my life being told to pay attention. I remember my teachers calling my name for an answer to a math problem as they noticed my eyelids drooping. I can't count the number of times that my attention has been directed to dirty dishes in the sink or a garbage can that needed to be emptied. A happy marriage requires frequent attention to the well-being of one's partner. One will not be successful at work without sustained attention to what one's supervisor desires and what customers and clients want and what vendors offer. Noticing can be a little different, though, than paying attention. Noticing can be more internally driven and can arise spontaneously. Noticing the sound of a bird draws one's attention to a branch where that sound came from. Noticing a spot of color on the ground draw one's attention to a snowdrop or a kiss. Noticing saliva in your mouth might happen before roasting smells come from the kitchen's oven or sense. Some of us are highly skilled in paying attention and in the noticing departments. A sommelier trains to taste wine, notice what is happening moment by moment to the nose and the mouth, and then describe the experience real time. My wife just had cataract surgery and is enjoying the ability to see better than she ever has. We are so grateful for the skill, attention, and noticing that the surgeon's team developed to ensure her surgery's success. I marvel at a jazz musician's ability to carefully listen and respond by noticing harmony, rhythm, as they add their inspired notes to the performance. What I'd like to explore today is the difference between these wonderful qualities of attention, noticing, and this other way of directing present moment attention, translated into English as mindfulness. They seem to be very similar, yet by exploring their differences, will open a significant area of concern having to do with the secularization of religious practices. American interest in the Asian practices of mindfulness meditation grew in the fertile soil of the Zen-influenced Beat Generation's poetry of the 1950s and the drug-altered consciousness of the 1960s counterculture centered in San Francisco. Many were introduced to meditation by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who brought us transcendental meditation work, TM. One of the biggest influences for mindfulness was John Kabat-Zinn's development of mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, at UMass in 1979. MBSR took methods from Theravada Buddhist meditation and reframed them in a secular, clinical language that Western medicine could accept. Decades of neuroscience research and brain imaging studies on these methods with measurable results gave mindfulness enormous credibility with skeptical audiences looking for evidence. This opened the door to therapeutic uses of mindfulness methods in psychology and psychotherapy in modalities like cognitive behavioral therapy. which embedded it in the mainstream mental health system. Corporations like Google, Apple, and Aetna offer mindfulness training to help their employees deal with stress. The military has used it to help with PTSD. Schools, hospitals, even prisons followed expanding the reach of those mindfulness methods. But nothing drives adoption of a technique or a method like connecting it to personal well-being or success. When famous folks like Oprah Winfrey, Katy Perry, Clint Eastwood, Kobe Bryant, Paul McCartney, Lady Gaga, Steve Jobs, and other celebrities extolled the value they found in mindfulness meditation, it entered the mainstream of American culture. I have been on the leading edge of this mindfulness practice too. I started, mindfulness practice back in 1984, over 40 years ago, before a lot of people were interested in it. I was newly exploring my spirituality in one of the finest places to do it at that time in the San Francisco Bay Area. A fellow spiritual seeker directed me to a ground level basement room of a large home in the Rockridge area of Oakland to learn and meditate. In that first class, I learned about the Buddha's Four Noble Truths and was hooked. The meditation teacher, a fellow named Jamie Braras, explained the human dilemma of the suffering component of existence, the mental component that makes it far worse, the possibility to work with the mind in a way that can potentially free one from one's misery, and the 8 components of the path to get there. Mindfulness meditation is a key component of that path to liberation from the mental component. Like a moth to a light bulb, I recognized the Buddha was addressing a fundamental personal problem that had troubled me since I had become a teenager. When I was 14, I was diagnosed with chronic intestinal problems. My doctor had no way to fix those problems, only methods to manage them. My condition caused me a lot of intestinal pain and had negative effects on my mind, my well-being. Finally, here was a practice that could help me be happy, even when my guts hurt, maybe even free me from suffering entirely. It wasn't until my second week-long meditation retreat that I had an awakening moment of clarity about what was going on when I meditated mindfully. Subsequent moments of clarity over the years have helped me recognize how crucial the Buddha's teachings are for me in my mindfulness meditation. When I tried to do the practice my way, I failed. When I tried to follow the detailed guidance of the teachers that have been refined over the last 2,500 years, it was far more successful. This gets me to the challenge of separating spiritual practice methods from the religious tradition from which it comes. John Kabat-Zinn, with the best of intentions, used methods from mindfulness meditation to help those suffering from chronic pain, stress, and illness in a hospital setting, and more broadly to relieve human suffering and foster compassion in human society. He wanted to translate mindfulness methods into a fully secular, culturally accessible for people who Western medicine couldn't help, but would never enter a Zen Buddhist center to learn these methods. And these people did get benefit, but something was missing that is crucial to the purpose of mindfulness practice itself. The core Buddhist framework of understanding reality is missing. Kevin Sin is far from the only person who has been out mining the spiritual traditions of the world and bringing them back in adaptive. Yoga is another widely adopted Eastern spiritual practice that has a far greater depth and breadth than we experience commonly here. A 500-hour teacher training to be a yoga instructor is quite different from what one would encounter if you encountered yoga in India. Yoga in its traditional Hindu and broader Indic context is a comprehensive path toward moksha, liberation from the cycle of birth. The physical postures, the asanas, are a small territory component of a much larger spiritual system described in texts like the Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. Eastern yoga, rather Western yoga, largely strips away the ethical precepts, the devotional elements, and the metaphysical framework, leaving mainly the physical exercise. Martial arts like Zen-rooted Aikido, Kung Fu, and Taekwondo carry deep spiritual and ethical frameworks, concepts of harmony with universal forces, cultivation of character, and restraint as a moral virtue. In some Western gyms and competitions, these are often reduced to fitness routines or combat sports, with the philosophical substrate treated as optional flavor. Most of Bach's compositions, the cantatas, the Massive B minor, St. Matthew Passion, the chorales, were explicitly liturgical, written to serve Lutheran worship, and, as he himself inscribed on scores, Soli Deo Gloria, to God alone. He conceived of music as a form of theology, almost a sonic sermon. Today's music is performed in concert halls as an aesthetic experience, appreciated for its mathematical elegance and emotional depth, with the theological content treated as a historical background rather than the living purpose. Fasting appears across Judaism, Yom Kippur, Christianity with Lent, and Islam with Ramadan, both of which are happening right now. And many other traditions as a practice of humility, repentance, solidarity with the poor, and nearness to God. The current secular version, intermittent fasting, time-restricted eating, reframes it entirely as a metabolic or longevity tool, with no reference to its meaning as a surrender of self or act of devotion. These examples highlight what is lost when a religious framework is stripped out of practice. In fact, the individualistic uses of religious traditions for personal satisfaction often undermines those original purposes. What is lost in the secularization of mindfulness is its purpose within the framework of the Buddha's enlightenment. Mindfulness practice assumes an ethical foundation without which little value can be gained. The Buddha instructed his monks to take the 5 precepts: no killing, no stealing, no lying, no use of intoxicants, no spiritual misconduct. Mindfulness practice also builds on the development of the power of the mind to focus or concentrate and hold it steady, also referred to as the development of samadhi. On these two foundations, mindfulness practice can be effective. The Buddha was very specific about how to work with what arises in the mind, how to work with the sense doors and body, how to work with the evaluations of what happens by noticing a pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feeling tone, how to work with what arises in the mind skillfully, and finally, how to witness and validate deep truths about existence. That validation process is dependent on perceiving the impermanence, the unsatisfactoriness, and non-eternal self at the heart of the Buddha's realization of the nature of reality. Mindfulness practice unmoored from these key truths of anicca, dukkha, and anatta misses its purpose of moving the meditator to liberatory awakening. Essentially, mindfulness meditators aren't just interested in reducing stress or performing better at work. They're trying to see through the illusion of an eternal self and be released from the ego-driven cycle of craving and aversion. This wholesome intention fundamentally changes the quality of noticing. The same breath watched for relaxation versus watched for insight into impermanence and non-self are phenomenologically quite different acts. One of the dangers here is cultural misappropriation. Borrowing indigenous practices like sweat lodges and peyote ceremonies from Native Americans for the individual experience is separate from being part of a tribal setting or culture, which can cause harm. This is an especially important caution for Unitarian Universalists who like to borrow rituals and practices from other traditions and cultures and adapt them for our purposes. Yet there is a paradox here with mindfulness practice. The Buddha didn't take ownership of what he taught as if God had given it to him for his specific purpose. The Buddha simply said he developed skillful means for people to discover the nature of reality through their own experience. The Buddha, in a sense, was a scientist of the mind, designing the mental experiments that would lead people to discover what is true. In that way, even if his mindfulness practice was not used exactly the way he designed it, the casual meditator may stumble on their truth by themselves. They will discover, just as the Buddha did, the reality of anicca, dukkha, and anatta, of impermanence, of unsatisfactoriness, of the lack of eternal self. In a sense, everyone does the practice wrong until they discover the truth embedded in the practice. This is why teachers like Ajahn Sumedho have said that Dharma has a way of teaching itself if you pay close enough attention. The way I like to say it is, meditation is doing me more than I am doing meditation. Still, why make a difficult practice any harder? The Buddha was an extremely wise and brilliant fellow. He left behind a precise map of the process of becoming free of dissatisfaction, suffering, and misery. in this challenging existence shadowed by sickness, the aging process, and death. I have greatly benefited from long engagement with the Buddha Dharma and its mindfulness practice. One way to taste some of the fruit is being willing to take noticing to the next level using mindfulness. Next Sunday at 8:30,